Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're diving into the story of a nation that literally reads like an epic novel. We're going to examine Ghana, not just as a place on a map, but as a deeply resilient protagonist on a multi-millennium journey. We'll be tracking its transformation from a collection of early river settlements to a kingdom of unimaginable wealth, right through the dark eras of colonization and military rule, all the way to its status today as a real beacon of modern democracy.
But hey, before we rewind the clock, I want to throw a question your way. Which nation sparked the wave of African independence? It's a provocative question, and the answer really hints at Ghana's monumental role in global history. See, Ghana wasn't just a participant in the 20th century, it was the catalyst. It was the very first nation south of the Sahara to break free from colonial rule, and that sent an absolute shockwave of hope across the entire continent.
So here's our roadmap for today. We're going to start with ancient gold and early kingdoms, move through colonization and the Ashanti Wars, explore pioneering African independence, examine the decades of military rule, celebrate the democratic rebirth, and finally, take a look at modern Ghana's complex future.
Section 1. Ancient Gold and Early Kingdoms. From Tribes to Empires.
Okay, so our story actually kicks off way back, around 3500 BC, with early river settlements that eventually blossomed into an incredibly diverse nation. Today, Ghana boasts over 200 distinct ethnic groups, but a few major ones really laid the earliest groundwork. You've got the Akan people dominating the south and southwest, making up the majority. Up in the north, there are the Mola Dogbani, who traditionally focused on pastoralism and farming. And to the east, in the Volta region, you find the Iwa. Together, these indigenous groups wove the incredibly rich cultural tapestry that defines Ghana even today.
And out of this mix grew empires with, honestly, staggering wealth. The ancient Ghana Empire, which was fueled by the trans-Saharan gold trade and controlled by the Soninke people, was legendary. Contemporary accounts actually marveled at it, describing dust-laden piles of gold and brocade flocked by lapdogs. I mean, wow. We're not talking about some basic trading post here. This was glorious architecture, highly intricate commercial systems, and luxury goods that were finer than anything Europeans had even dreamed of at the time. Gold was literally the heartbeat of this early era.
Section 2. Colonization and the Ashanti Wars. The arrival of the Europeans. Now, the arrival of Europeans changed the trajectory of this wealthy region forever. It's a huge pivot. We go from a pre-colonial reality of complete autonomy, a flourishing trans-Saharan trade, and incredible wealth, to a pretty grim exploitative era. Starting in the late 15th century, Portuguese navigators arrived seeking that famous gold, building Elmina Castle in 1482. Over the centuries, the Dutch, the Danes, and finally the British showed up. The region was eventually turned into a British crown colony. Local courts were abolished, traditional chiefs were basically turned into puppets, and vast resources were systematically exploited for foreign gain.
But listen, the people at the Gold Coast didn't just quietly accept this. No way. The Ashanti Kingdom, which was this highly organized, powerful state, put up fierce resistance. They had consolidated their power by 1700, growing rich on the palm oil trade. And as the British tried to push inland, they were met with severe military clashes that raged on for years. The Ashanti were fighting tooth and nail for their self-determination. It wasn't until the super bloody and costly capture of the Ashanti capital, Kumasi, in 1900 that the British finally managed to break their military power.
Here's the crucial takeaway, though. The fall of Kumasi didn't end the resistance. Actually, scratch that. It just changed its form. The strategy shifted entirely from open warfare to organized political action. People started forming groups like the Aborigines Rights Protection Society, protesting land grabs and unfair taxation. They sent these massive petitions straight to the British Crown and organized wide-scale boycotts. This incredibly educated, politically conscious middle class eventually established the United Gold Coast Convention, which laid the absolute groundwork for the modern independence movement.
Section 3. Pioneering African Independence. The rise of Kwame Nkrumah.
All right, things really start heating up with the 1948 Accra riots over rising food prices. This marks the true inception of a new era. And into this ferment steps Kwame Nkrumah, a fiery speaker, a brilliant organizer. He anchored the whole movement with a powerful ideology he called conscientism. Basically, this was a philosophical framework for African decolonization and building a unified Pan-African identity. He didn't just want to free the Gold Coast, his vision was to unify the minds and borders of the entire continent against imperialism.
Nkrumah's rhetoric? Absolutely electric. In his famous Motion of Destiny speech to Parliament, he declared, "We can only meet the challenge of our age as a free people, hence our demand for our freedom, for only free men can shape the destinies of their future." That message just electrified the masses. His party, the Convention People's Party, won landslide elections. And get this, sometimes they won while Nkrumah himself was sitting right in a colonial prison cell. The British ultimately had no choice. On March 6, 1957, the Gold Coast became the independent Republic of Ghana.
So, independence is one. What's next? Well, Nkrumah immediately hits the ground running with an ambitious 5-year plan. His stated goal was to totally abolish poverty, ignorance, and disease, kicking off this unbelievable infrastructure boom. We're talking the massive Volta River Project, brand new road networks across the country, new schools and technical colleges, health centers for better hygiene. He also rapidly set up state-owned enterprises to drive fast industrialization. Ghana was truly living up to its name as the Star of Africa.
Section 4. Decades of military rule, an era of turbulence.
Unfortunately, that rapid modernization hit some massive economic roadblocks, which stifled political opposition and triggered a dizzying chain reaction of instability. In 1966, while Nkrumah was actually away on a peace mission to Vietnam, he was overthrown in a military coup. From there, Ghana experienced this really rapid turnover of power. In 1972, Colonel Achiampong seized control. Then, Flight Lieutenant Jerry John Rawlings led a coup in 1979. And after a brief return to civilian rule, Rawlings was back, establishing the Provisional National Defense Council in 1981. It was an incredibly volatile 15-year stretch.
The atmosphere in the country was just chaotic. There was this phrase, "all die be die, I know to fear," echoing through the streets of Accra during the 1981 uprisings. It perfectly captures the sheer desperation and the fearlessness of a public pushed right to the edge by severe economic deterioration, unemployment, and the rapid, often violent, changeover of these military regimes. The nation's incredible wealth and potential were seemingly slipping away.
Section 5. The Democratic Rebirth. The Return to Civilian Rule.
But, like we said at the start, our protagonist is resilient. After 17 long years of military rule, internal protests, and mounting global pressures led to a remarkable turnaround. The 1992 Constitution fundamentally redesigned the whole architecture of the state. It brought back secret ballot, multi-party elections, guaranteed fundamental human rights, and created the National Commission on Civic Education to make sure citizens actually understood their rights and duties. Ghana transitioned back to a democracy, and it's widely considered one of the most successful transitions in all of Africa. This democratic rebirth brought massive structural changes to the economy, too. For decades, agriculture was the backbone. But recently, especially with the commercial production of oil, the services sector has just exploded, climbing to nearly 75% of GDP, almost 3/4 of the economy. However, there is a pretty stark warning sign here. Manufacturing has actually declined to just 10.8%. And that means the economy simply isn't producing as many stable, transformative jobs as it really needs to.
Section 6. Modern Ghana's Complex Future, Triumphs and Trials.
Today, Ghana is hailed as the Star of Africa by the World Bank, but every protagonist faces hurdles, right? And one number represents perhaps the biggest hurdle of all, 28.1%. That is the youth unemployment rate in Ghana, a figure that is more than double the national average. When you have this massive population of young, energetic people without access to secure incomes, it creates immense social pressures. It ends up pushing some toward risky behaviors or forcing them into the informal economy just to survive.
So what's the path forward? Well, policymakers have to focus on actionable pathways for sustainable growth. They need to heavily strengthen technical and vocational education, to actually match the skills youth have with the jobs that exist in the real world. They must boost that lagging manufacturing sector to create tangible employment. There needs to be way better collaboration between academia and industry. And critically, they absolutely must tackle the systemic corruption and political patronage that siphons wealth away from the public good.
If we pull this whole epic story together, it really comes down to a single phrase. A nation of gold, a warrior king, the Star of Africa. We've watched Ghana's journey from the ancient, incredibly wealthy empires of the trans-Saharan trade through the brutal exploitation of the colonial era to becoming the pioneering force of African independence. We've seen it weather the storm of military coups and emerge as a vibrant, multi-party democracy. It's a story of just profound resilience.
So, as the Star of Africa navigates these modern hurdles, like youth unemployment and the serious need for structural economic reform, what is Ghana's next chapter going to look like? The foundation is incredibly strong for sure, but the choices made today are going to dictate the future. Thank you so much for joining me on this explainer. I really hope this journey helped you grasp the incredible depth of Ghana's history. See you next time.